All right. Happy Wednesday, everybody. This is Mackenzie Franklin from SideGame LLC here in Colorado Springs, Colorado, welcoming you to the channel. And today we have a fantastic, awesome special guest new to the YouTube space. This is Bryan from the Grumpy Meeple. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Bryan.
Hi, everybody. I'm the Grumpy Meeple. You can see my dope t-shirt. My wife makes these with the Cricut hobby tool that I bought her for Christmas. She had no idea that she was going to be churning out this nerd stuff, but the thing is perfect for it. So yeah, so I'm very new to the kind of YouTube game. I think I launched my channel almost 3 weeks to the day ago, but I'm having a lot of fun with it. I'm kind of fumbling through it, taking feedback from people who are watching and trying to, improve and really just doing it for fun and so that I have somebody other than my completely disinterested wife and children to kind of rant at about this gaming stuff. My wife is so tired of hearing about Shadows of Brimstone. She just couldn't take it anymore. So
we're so happy to have you on the channel, Bryan. So Bryan actually contacted me through a comment section on one of my other videos where I talked about games that you can really invest in. And he asked me, hey, have you ever heard of this game, Shadows of Brimstone? And I said I'd heard of it. It kind of fit in that same similar space of Kingdom Death where you assemble the models and it's a large lifestyle game. But he reached out to me and said, hey, we need to talk about this because if you don't know about it, more people need to know about it. So that's kind of where I'm at on this video. Anything you want to add, Bryan?
No, I just that I'm in the exact same position with Kingdom Death. At least in Colorado, both of these games are actually hard to find. Like hardly anybody sells Brimstone, and I've literally never seen Kingdom Death in a store, and I've probably been to 30 board game stores in Colorado. So I'm just super interested to hear more about it, and it's super excited to tell my wife that I found another game to spend $2,000 on.
These are definitely huge boutique style board games. Generally, you're going to have to go to the publisher themselves to find them. You're going to have to kind of go bend over backwards to find content you're missing or expansions. In Kingdom Death, at least. How about yourself? How does Brimstone compare?
Yeah, you can find the Brimstone stuff. Like you can get Brimstone on Miniature Market. There's a site that I recommend to people called, well, I guess Troll Horde doesn't actually have Brimstone. I'm thinking Core Space. But like Mini Market and the other kind of big retailers, and even Amazon does stock Brimstone stuff. But it doesn't have much of a physical retail presence in the region. And that's something that always bums me out because I would love to be able to just kind of go and pick up an expansion if I'm bored. And so what I do instead is I buy like 20 of them I basically bought everything. This one site, boardingschoolgames.com, happened to have a lot of older Brimstone stuff. And so I just dropped like $500 and I have a giant stockpile of it in the plastic just sitting in my basement waiting till I can ever actually play it.
I'm sure there are so many gamers that sympathize and empathize with you. Oh man, I know that there's definitely piles of minis that are still left to be assembled and expansion content to jump into. But speaking of jumping into, let's go ahead and jump into the discussion. So we're here to talk about Shadows of Brimstone and Kingdom Death Monster. And we're going to do this format where we're going to kind of go back and forth discussing each of them. And we're going to go ahead and start off with a deep dive into what Kingdom Death is. And then we'll jump to Shadows of Brimstone. So first off, let's go ahead and talk about Kingdom Death Monster. So Kingdom Death Monster is a gigantic nightmare horror campaign game. You play as survivors that are all trying to do just that. Keep yourselves alive and prevent these nightmare creatures from killing you and your entire society. You play as kind of like a god in this world where you control all of the different survivors and you're not a single survivor. You send out 4 every year to go on a hunt to bring back food for the civilization, to develop yourselves, to get innovations, just kind of to do anything to increase your society. So the big thing here is that it is separated into those 3 main phases. So you've got the showdown phase, you've got the showdown phase, you've got the hunt phase, and all of these different ways to organize your I guess, civilization. So Kingdom Death Monster is split into those 3 phases. And the most popular one, the one that you really are playing for, is the Showdown phase. This is where you're going to be taking your crew of survivors and doing just that. You're going to be hunting. You'll have a showdown with a specific monster. And you'll be fighting. They have their really cool AI deck that you'll be using against them. But before you get to that point, you're also going to have to survive through a hunt. And this hunt has you going through like a line of cards until you eventually reach that monster. And this hunt will basically be a collection of random events and tells the story of your hunters as they are getting to the beast. Mm-hmm. And then it culminates in a settlement phase where you're going to be coming back to your crew of your civilization of survivors and saying, hey, what are we going to do next? So the big thing is you go on the hunt, you find the giant beast, and then once you find this giant beast, you take all of its remains and you bring it back to your settlement and you innovate using those items. You create weapons, you create items, and you really decide how you're going to be as a civilization. So I really like this whole system, and that's really just a very broad overview. We'll get into more in depth in a bit. So next we'll talk about Shadows of Brimstone. So what's this game all about?
Sure. So Shadows of Brimstone is a game that came out back in 2004. It's made by a company called Flying Frog Productions, and it's basically a co-op dungeon crawler, very much in the Warhammer Quest kind of milieu. It's damn near a re-implementation of Warhammer Quest, the original Warhammer Quest from 1995. So in terms of the theme of the game, it takes place during the Old West, during that kind of gold rush era. And in the process of searching for gold, these miners discover a material called darkstone that they learn has magical properties and becomes very valuable. And so they start hoarding it and collecting it, and these big companies come in and buy, collections of darkstone and dump them into warehouses. And it turns out that this material gets more volatile the more it's kind of gathered together. And so what ends up happening is the town of Brimstone, where the primary mine for this material is, ends up basically being ripped to pieces by a giant darkstone explosion. And the explosion destroys the town, but also rips a bunch of kind of holes or gateways in reality to other worlds and other dimensions and stuff. And so the kind of basic theme is really amazing and unique because it lets Flying Frog kind of go wherever they want with the game in terms of expansions, right? So, imagine you have an Old West saloon girl with a futuristic sci-fi gun from a derelict spaceship that is also powered by darkstone. And so it's connected to the Old West via a portal, basically, that you can go through. And maybe she also has a magma sword that she got from a hellish fire dimension, which is connected as well. And so you're playing as these heroes who are basically trying to push back the hordes of demons that are pouring through these gates to try and get this darkstone because it's as valuable to them as it is to us. In terms of the gameplay, so it's 1 to 4 player by default. I have played it with up to 4 people, I think. And I enjoy it at all player counts, but I mostly play it as it's solo. And I do enjoy it as a solo experience. And so basically you're creating a character from scratch, or if you have an existing character, you can pick up where you left off. And in the core game, you're just basically, each expansion comes with a book of missions, and you're just picking a mission and reading the kind of setup narrative and the pass fail conditions and whatnot, and then going into the dungeon. And the dungeons are procedurally generated by one of the many, many decks of cards that come in this game. I'd be interested to know, because I know KDM comes with a lot of cards. I must have 3,000 cards for Brimstone at least. Like, it's insane, the number of, and the different decks. I've got a whole organizational system that I came up with over the last few years to try and keep this stuff kind of separated, because you're pulling from a deck, right, to tell you like what map tile you go to next. You're pulling from a deck to tell you what kind of enemy you're facing, and there are unique decks for all those things for all the different other worlds that you can go to as well. And so it's not the kind of game where you just like throw it in a box. You know, you gotta you gotta organize it, or you're gonna have a heck of a time getting started.
Kingdom Death Monster is really nice, where the box itself comes with a very good organizer, and it also has little tabs. So very similar to your system you have here for Shadows of Brimstone, it comes with that. So it's kind of nice, and you're totally right. The main core box of Kingdom Death Monster is about a yard, so about 3 feet, and it's filled with cards. So it's completely to the brim, and that's if you have all the expansions and their sleeve, but it's packed, but it does come with those dividers. So it actually makes the gameplay surprisingly easy to jump into and get started. That's great. Yeah, Brimstone comes with a pretty crappy insert that there's just no way in hell you're getting away with it. So you saw on that picture, I have this ridiculous system where I have these little bins that I label with the name of the other world. And then, oh, look, there's the low threat deck, the medium threat deck, the high threat deck, and so on. And so this is about half of them, because I have a campaign going right now, so the other half is on my table. Gotcha. But yeah, and so the gameplay is heavily kind of die based. So by default, the rule is that you roll to move, which I know some people don't like. I kind of don't mind it. It adds a little bit of unpredictability to the, to the game. You're rolling to attack, to defend, you're rolling on random events, you're rolling for the monster attacks. So if you don't like rolling dice, stay the hell away from this game, because you are rolling dice constantly. And that's definitely a similarity that Kingdom Death has. Everything is resolved based on D10s. It's not necessarily roll to move. There's some stuff that you can guarantee, and that's really where some of the strategy in the game comes from, because you can guarantee specific cards, specific behaviors. So it's all about kind of finding the balance between, is it worth risking this luck, or do I make sure I go for the guarantee? So it's a nice balance between the two. That's cool. And then, I would describe it as, I think it's the closest that I've ever played to like Diablo 2, the board game, because everything is procedurally generated in that way that, like a dungeon in Diablo would be, or at least would feel, where because you're drawing from a deck that tells you what the next map tile is, you never know what's coming up next. So one minute you might be just in kind of a standard old mine room, and the next minute you might have found an underground lake, and maybe there's like kind of like a watcher in the water, like in Lord of the Rings, and you roll a die to see if it grabs you, or if you can sneak past it and steal a treasure from the room or something like that. So it's, and the enemies are the same way. You end up with a big deck of enemies, especially if you're collecting the expansions, and you shuffle it up and you're just pulling randomly. So you never know who you're going to fight. And so, yeah, so it's just an endlessly kind of customizable, endlessly randomized dungeon crawl, with the unique kind of feature being, or one of the main unique features is just being this idea of the other worlds, right? So you can go to the derelict ship, which is a spaceship powered by Darkstone with a Darkstone warp core that has ruptured, and so all the guys on it have been turned into zombies in spacesuits. Like, it's awesome. Or you can go to the Caverns of Cinder, which is the kind of hellish fire realm that I was talking about. Or maybe you end up in the Blasted Waste, which is kind of like Tatooine mixed with Mad Max, basically. And they all have their own unique mechanics associated to them, and their own enemy sets and everything. And so it really lets you pick and choose. Maybe you're not interested in the Blasted Waste. Maybe you want to focus on the Forbidden Fortress, which takes place in feudal Japan. So you just have a ton of
choice and a ton of randomization, and they just do not stop putting stuff out for the game. It's just constant.
So I know you touched on this earlier, but let's go ahead and jump in a little bit to the campaign system itself. So I'm going to go ahead and start off with Kingdom Death as a whole and just kind of introduce you to what does it look like starting a new campaign. So with Kingdom Death Monster, the way that you're going to start a campaign is with one of these, a settlement sheet. People have remade the original version to kind of include more facts and whatnot, but this is honestly the timeline of your game. Generally, you're going to pick a specific campaign, and very similar to Shadows, you're going to be able to pick based on expansions you've taken as well as the core game, but you'll pick the type of game you want to play. Sometimes there are variants that you can include, and then you'll populate that year, the years to come with events. So these are going to be things like, if we can take a look here, returning survivors, endless screams. This just shows that every year there's going to be an event that happens. And this could be a random generated event. It could be introducing new monsters to hunt. You have all sorts of stuff that you can add to your quest, essentially. So every year you're going to go out and you will run through the cycle of that hunt, settle, and showdown. So you'll be doing all those things each time. Through this game, you're going to have some progression as well. So there's not only your progression through that settlement seat, but there's also character progression. And character progression is generally done through what are called disorder and fighting art cards. So you really get to know the survivors that you're using, and specifically, you'll get to know them based on how they behave. They'll learn things during their fights, and that's what the fighting arts are, or they'll get messed up during the fights, and that's what the disorders are. You could have something where you're afraid of big monsters, and you just won't go hunt big monsters anymore. You could have things with binge eating disorders. If you ever find something you can eat, you'll eat it, even if you don't want to. Like, you might find a bug that'll kill you, but you're just so hungry that you'll eat it anyway. Alternatively, you'll have those fighting arts, which allow you to be like, ooh, I really like using this survivor. Let's bring him on this hunt. He might know where the enemy's blind spots are, or he might be crazy and get really excited whenever he gets to go kill something. So get that customization based on those disorders and fighting arts is a lot of fun. The next thing is the narrative itself. So the big thing that you'll be developing is your settlement itself, and that comes in the form of innovations and principles. Innovations are ideas that you'll have when you are coming back from hunts. These could be things like developing cooking, developing statues, art, all this stuff. But then you have something a little bit more in depth, and that's going to be your principles. During certain points, whether it be somebody dies, somebody's born, or you've just been around a while, your population's getting bigger, you're going to have to pick your principle. So, for example, we have here principle conviction. Are you going to embrace this dark, terrible world and go barbaric, or are you going to take a more, more artistic approach, appreciate the life that you have, and be more peaceful? So you can pick and choose. This also, one of the more egregious examples of this is when the first person dies, you have to decide if you are going to eat them and consume their, consume their resources, or are you going to bury them and, respect the dead? So there's a lot of practical application for this. Be like, in a game where I'm getting resources, it might be a good thing to cannibalize. Or you take it the more story aspect and be like, oh yeah, we're gonna do this because we're crazy. We're just born in this crazy setting and we're developing our society. This is the way. Like, you've got all sorts of different things to think about. And in addition to the settlement events and the principles, you're also going to get narrative based on the actual fights that you're playing against. And that's probably my favorite part of this game, are the fights. Whenever you attack something, whenever you are fighting a monster, they're going to come with their own deck of hit locations. And that's what this is. When you hit something successfully, you'll reveal a card and see where you actually struck them. This, for example, is the beast's paw. Then you'll see if you've actually wounded them. If you wound them, they might have reactions. Like this one says, if you miss the wound, something bad happens. You try to hit the hand, you missed. He's going to attack you because you're right next to his paw. Alternatively, you can get critical hits, which are the lantern 10s, and those will trigger something even cooler. And for example, on this one, you're going to destroy the white lion's foot if you do so. He's going to lose his claw. You're going to get the claw as a resource. This is going to be a persistent injury, so it might affect other cards. And the beast that you just attacked is going to get -1 movement. So you have all these cool consequences. And not only does the narrative and the campaign as a whole tell a story, but every fight itself has a story. And I think that is super awesome. You have a lot of flexibility with the creatures that you decide to put in your campaign. There's different levels and different tiers of monsters. So each story that you take part of is going to be fantastic and different. So that's kind of the overall campaign. Without getting into spoilers, not only are you going to have these monsters that you're going to be hunting, but some might come to you. But I'm not going to spoil anything here because there's a lot of cool content to discover. So Bryan, go ahead and tell me about the overall campaign structure of Brimstone.
Sure, I will, but I will also just say that, man, that sounds awesome. I'm super worried about what's going to happen to me now financially as a result of this.
Black Friday. If you wait till Black Friday, everything's half off.
I've been looking at it for years, so I've hunted their Black Friday sales, and I sat there with it in my cart like, come on, I just backed Oathsworn. I can't. I just went all in on Oathsworn or Tanaris Adventures or whatever. But that sounds really cool. So yeah, let's talk Brimstone. So Brimstone is an interesting kind of beast because you really have two campaign possibilities. You have what comes in the core box, which is very lightweight in terms of campaign and narrative and world building. So basically, the core game campaign system, it introduces the idea of character progression. So you earn XP for killing monsters, completing missions, passing tests and such. You're getting gold and Darkstone as you venture through the mine, and you eventually can level up, purchase new abilities, weapons, and such. And you have this talent tree where each class has 4 different kind of paths that they can go down, and it's very much like World of Warcraft or something, where it's a progressive path where the powerful abilities are at the bottom. And you also have the idea of basically injuries and madness in the game. So it sounds like similar to KDM. You can, if you take too much damage physically, you can get injured, which could be anything from like a broken leg to a gushing wound in your chest, and each one has its own unique kind of effects on your gameplay. So the broken leg is going to slow you down, right? You're going to lose 2 movement points if you have your broken leg. I'm making this up, but generally.
Yeah.
Whereas if you break your hand, you have to remove one of your weapons because you're one-handed now, and in a similar fashion, you can also just kind of go crazy. So if you take too much damage from the madness, from all the insane, because one thing I didn't mention is it's kind of got a Cthulhu vibe to it as well, along with all this other crazy narrative stuff. There's the Darkstone is heavily implied to have kind of a corrupting effect. And so you can get corrupted where you'll mutate and your actual, like I had a character who had 2 heads. And this was great because he could wear 2 hats. So he could double the stats from hats. But every turn I had to roll a die. And if I rolled a 6, the 2 heads would get stuck arguing with each other, and I would lose my turn. Like, is that incredible?
That's awesome. I love that creativity. That's fun.
Yeah. And so the insanity is kind of a similar thing where you can just go crazy and you have to live with it until you get it fixed, basically. The way you get it fixed is at the end of each mission, you travel to a town, basically. And the travel mechanism and the town itself is very kind of simplistic and very kind of transitory in the core game. So you basically just roll on a die. You just roll on a chart that is called the travel hazards chart. So you're going from the dungeon to a town. You roll a die to see what happens on the way, and then you go to a totally random town. Doesn't have a name, doesn't have a kind of there's no kind of personality to it. It's just random town with X number of random locations. And if you have an injury like you're a broken leg, you're just hoping that there's a doc's office there so that you can get it fixed. If you can't, then you have to keep going, basically. But when you leave the town, it kind of ceases to exist, like in the game world. It's like I said, it's very transitory. You just move on to the next mission, which isn't really connected in any way to any other mission. You're just kind of picking from the book or maybe rolling a die. And then the next time you come out of the dungeon, you're going to a completely different town that you're rolling or shuffling tokens to generate randomly. So in terms of character progression, it's pretty strong in the core game. The world progression and the narrative in the core game are kind of virtually non-existent. There's some light narrative for each individual mission. And again, the theme is really strong, so that helps, but there's no kind of long-term goal or theme other than to level up.
But you're here to talk specifically about a change to that, something that was created to actually bring a strong narrative. Yes?
I am, yes. So that's the core game. There's a fan-made expansion for this game called Hexcrawl that basically takes that underlying system and just layers onto it persistence, an overworld, persistent, procedurally generated worlds and towns and such. Your character has more kind of persistence, and it adds, there's a short story campaign which adds very much that like narrative, like a Descent campaign or something, you know, where you're going from mission to mission and there's an overarching kind of storyline. So the character progression for the most part is unchanged. There are a few tweaks and a few things that can kind of deepen it a little bit, but you're mostly, you know, you're getting gold, you're leveling up, you're picking new abilities and stuff. The sense of world and world movement in the game is completely altered and built out in a way that doesn't even get hinted at in the core box. So they give you this, and I brought a few props, as you saw earlier, but here's my map for Hexcrawl that I had printed and laminated. I spent like $150 at FedEx printing crap for this stupid system. You can print it all on your own computer at home. I just happen to be super anal about this stuff. But so you're moving along this, as you can see, it's gridded. It's hex-based. That's why they call it Hexcrawl. And so what I have is, I have a little Meeple, cowboy Meeple from a game called Tiny Epic Westerns, which I never played, but I cannibalized for Brimstone. And I'm just moving my guy around. So you have this idea of, oh, I'm in Seraphin. I'm not in random town number 1002, you know what I mean? And I'm trying to get to Brimstone. To do that, I have to cross this map. And so right off the bat, like if you did nothing else, because this system is very modular, you can kind of print what you want for it. If you did nothing but print this map and integrate the overworld movement rules, you are deepening the experience beyond anything that's available in the core box. And beyond what's available in most of, I play a lot of these games, a lot. KDM is one of the only ones I haven't played. And I don't think I've ever played one that is this kind of rich if you dive into this system. It just gives you like much more of a sense of like where you are, why you're doing what you're doing. The overworld movement adds a lot of danger and kind of immersion to the game because they have this system called the Wilderness Encounter System where random kind of procedurally generated events can happen as you move across the map based off of a die roll. So an example that just blew my mind, and I always use it as the example for this, was I had a mission where I was looking for a missing townsperson from one of the towns in the kind of middle of the map here. And I had to go to the dungeon, one of the dungeons nearby, one of the old mines, and see if I could find him, which I did, but he had already died, unfortunately, because of how the mission played out. So I had to leave with his body in tow. And so what does that do? Well, normally when you're moving across the overworld map, you get 6 movement points a day. And depending on what type of terrain you're moving through, you have to spend either 1, 2, or 3. So if you're moving along a railroad track or a road, you spend 1 point. So you can get across a good little piece of the map. But because I had this body in tow, my movement was reduced to 3 movement a day. And every day you roll on this wilderness events chart. So I was getting half as far and rolling twice as often on this chart. So I come out of this dungeon. Yeah. So I come out of this dungeon and immediately roll a wilderness encounter that resulted in the rope bridge that I was crossing breaking as I was going across it. And so half of my party fell into a ravine, and it immediately dumped me into another mission that I was not planning on going.
You just got sidetracked, right?
That's right. Right. So I had to fight. I had to split my party up and put half of them in the dungeon trying to find their way out, and the other half at the dungeon entrance trying to hack their way down to them and fight my way out of this completely random, totally unexpected, procedurally kind of generated event that just, it's incredible the amount of kind of spice and danger it adds to something as simple as just like going to turn your quest in. That's what I was trying to do. I was just trying to go back to town and get my freaking reward, and I end up in the bottom of a pit and fighting through another mission.
So that's really interesting. So Kingdom Death Monster is a lot more abstracted with the way that they do kind of the travel. So you are in the middle of like this dark plateau, right? So it's just dark plateau of stone faces, and every time you hunt a monster, it's going to give you a path that you're going to travel along. And so you are, once again, abstractly just kind of chasing the scent of the monster, and he's represented by that mini on that hunt board. And so every time that you move, you have to pull an event. Very similar to your Shadows game, where you're going to be taking those events. And you don't really want those events because they can end up being pretty terrible or might have you go down something else. With the new edition of Kingdom Death, they're releasing little side adventures that can happen as you play. So that's kind of what you were talking about there as well. So I think it's very interesting that they have these two ideas, but I like the idea of Shadows that you have a map of the world as a whole, and that's super cool. I like that you can kind of plan where you're going as opposed to just being like this primalistic instinct of these survivors being like, we're just really hungry and we're going after that. So,
yeah. And not only can you plan where you're going, but the missions from the adventure book for Hexcrawl comes with its own set of missions and rules and stuff. They will dictate where you need to go. So it'll say, okay, so your mission is this, you got hired to do a job, you need to go, and there's a rumor that some demons have been imprisoning people in one of the nearby towns. So roll a D8 3 times to identify which towns you need to go to, and then you have to go out. And so it's telling you where you have to go, and it's pushing you. And because the world is persistent, meaning that when you go to a town, you randomly generate it, but then that's that town, right? It doesn't change when you leave. So if that town happens to have a blacksmith and a doctor's office, maybe it's a good place to stop, but you might not find another town with a doc's office on the entire map. And so that also will dictate your movement. It's like such a simple idea, but it adds so much richness to the game and the sense of kind of world building, where my version of, the town, Seraphin, is going to be different than yours, and it's going to be different every time I play through a new campaign of the Hexcrawl. And so it really makes your decisions matter a lot more, because like a good example, another example I use is the first mission that I did when I first started Hexcrawl. This is brutal. Literally the first mission I did, I failed the mission. And what happened when I failed was there was a kind of event, narrative at the end that said the darkness, there's this idea of the darkness, like the Cthulhu vibe. And it's like this kind of manifestation of evil. So the darkness escaped the mind, and it wiped the 3 closest towns off the face of the earth, basically. So I'm stuck at the beginning of my campaign in the middle of nowhere, and I have to fight my way across the map to get to the next town. It's just like, what? That's amazing. Like, how could that just couldn't happen in the core game. Nothing even remotely close to that could happen in the core game. And then on top of all that, the adventure book that I showed you, it does have an actual narrative short story campaign, which will guide you and makes for a good starting off point, because it will kind of loosely guide you through the mechanics of the game. Like it'll tell you to go to a town and to generate a town, and then it will tell you, oh, now you need to, whatever it might be, take a railroad, take a train to the next town, that kind of thing.
This sounds like the Hexcrawl system took a good game system and created a great campaign setting, and I think that's fantastic. Wow.
And it's so incredible that it's a fan-based thing. It's so good. Like, first of all, it's easily the best, most robust user-generated content I've ever seen for a board game, possibly for anything. And it's so good that Flying Frog actually has their own campaign system coming out with that was packaged with the Kickstarter that they ran a few years ago for Shadows of Brimstone Adventures. And my sense, and the sense that I've seen on other YouTube channels and kind of in the community, is that there's no way in hell that that campaign system is going to match up to Hexcrawl, because they're not crazy enough to spend like 10 years building it out. You know what I mean? They got to just crank it out and then move on. So I'm excited to see what they do, but I don't imagine that it's going to be replacing the Hexcrawl system.
Do you think that the Hexcrawl, I guess the group of Hexcrawl, will incorporate any of these potentially into their system if it's, you know, if it's something that's actually good?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I think it's definitely possible. So there are currently kind of two main settings for Shadows of Brimstone. There's the Old West, and then there's the feudal Japan set that came out with Forbidden Fortress. And so I know that that group is working on adapting Hexcrawl to the feudal Japan. And so I wouldn't be surprised if in the future they decided to adapt it to the what do they call it? Perilous Expeditions is the campaign that Flying Frog is putting out, the campaign system that they're putting out. So yeah, I imagine that they'll just keep working on this until people stop using it, which will be when I die, basically, because this thing is awesome. And then, not to go on and on, but there's so much more going on. They add new rules for combat, mounted combat, dungeon terrain, like, you know, actual mineral deposits and stuff. And they all have a unique impact. It's like if you're standing next to a Darkstone deposit that you randomly roll to determine where it is on that map tile, you get corrupted by it for being close to it. So it changes the way you move, and you're trying to lure your enemies into it and stuff like that. It takes all the hero classes from the game and creates villain versions of them. There aren't really many human bad guys in Brimstone. You usually find like demons or, you know, kind of humanoid aliens from another realm. They create in the Hexcrawl system a whole new set of bad guys that are just dudes, you know, like bandits and
people that populate that world with you that have gone crazy.
Yeah, right. And then evil versions of all the hero classes. So you can come up against an evil gunslinger, and he has a whole set of unique abilities that are like a dark mirror image of your character class gunslinger. And they add just so much stuff. Jobs, which are kind of mini kind of missions that oftentimes take place kind of on the overworld. Like I had a job where I had to search the closest 4 tiles next to a river to try and find the bodies of these people who disappeared one night, you know, like that kind of thing. And all this stuff interlocks, and it just creates this branching narrative that's, to some extent, it's not like scripted, you know, it's a narrative that's a result of your gameplay. That's what's so incredible about it, because it adds unpredictability and it adds that endless kind of replayability. You know, the next time I play through Hexcrawl, I might not ever see that little kind of wilderness event that dropped me into a mine. You know, I'll see 50 other ones.
Totally get it. There's totally understand. Your game is going to be completely different than anybody else's, and that's for sure, especially with your procedurally generated maps and, you know, missions and events that come up.
Yeah. And the whole system is it's incredible. Like, these guys, they have a racket going like you cannot believe, because all of this stuff, when they put out a new expansion, even a mini expansion, it'll come with like the monster cards for that particular expansion or whatever. and the tiles and everything. But it will also come with tiles and monsters and missions that can be integrated into the larger setting of just Brimstone to add to that randomization. You know, it's like if you were a developer and you were creating Diablo 4, and one day you had 50 monsters, and the next day you built another 20, and you put them into the pot, you know, and you're randomly selecting them. So just like the amount of crap that they have put out for this game and are continuing to put out, the Brimstone Adventures Kickstarter alone, it's just hilariously robust. Like if you're sitting around and you're thinking to yourself, you know what I have is like an endless amount of free time and $5,000. Brimstone, baby, that's where you want to be, because man, you can just get as deep into this stuff as you want to, basically. And people will buy, you know, they'll buy 6. Like, okay, so you'll have like an enemy like the Serpent Men of Jargono, and there are 6 different. Here's where the racket really is crazy. There are 6 different variants of that enemy type, right? There are different tribes, and they each have their own unique. Of course, they each have their own unique paint scheme. So people will buy 6 copies of the same expansion just to paint them in their little unique colors, you know, for that particular tribe. Like, it's just. I wish I had come up with this. Like, and I guarantee you Games Workshop is sitting around like, if we had known we could sell another $5,000-$10,000 worth of crap to people with this Warhammer Quest thing, we would have stuck with it. Because you know, they dropped that line for a long time. Warhammer Quest came out in 1995, and I don't think they brought out the kind of newer version until the Silver Tower until like 2010 or something like that. So for that whole period of time, there was just nothing. And from what I understand, this guy, Jason Hill, who kind of developed this system, he got his start writing like fan content for Warhammer Quest, and eventually ended up working on the game or having some kind of relationship with GW, and then just said one day, hey, why don't I just do almost the same thing, slightly different, and make it so that it can be expanded until the end of time, basically. Because they can do anything. They can do whatever they want. Like they could do dinosaurs. They could just say, yeah, you know what? You found a gateway to prehistoric America, you know, and there are dinosaurs, there's T-Rexes on the board. Or they could say, oh, what if we had an underwater world, or ancient Egypt, or like, it's just incredible how expandable it is with this simple kind of narrative, because you have to have that. You have to have that narrative tie, or else it just doesn't make sense. It all becomes very disconnected. Why are these guys from Tradera showing up on Earth? Well, they're here because they're hunting the Darkstone and they're trying to collect it, and they want it just as much as you do. So
it seems like there are a lot of just really cool ideas that are in the game already and for potential future expansions. Let's go ahead and move on to the next section, which is going to be about just our favorite thing. So I'll go ahead and start off with this. My favorite thing in Kingdom Death Monster has to be just the showdowns themselves. So the showdowns here are, you're going to have a group of 4 survivors that you're going to send out onto the battlefield. And these survivors are going to be outfitted with gear. And these are going to be part of what's called the gear grid. So you have a 3x3 grid that you'll be linking different things to. So you'll see on that cat bow and that helmet, there's actually a blue little icon. If you match those, you're going to unlock special abilities. And that's what you're going to be doing with those resources that you're getting from hunting monsters, is you'll be using those to craft these items and hopefully make combos and unlock special abilities through it. So you have a mini objective during each hunt of things that you're looking for, or maybe specific monsters you're going to go fight. In addition, much like your miniatures with different tribes having their own sets of miniatures, this game comes with extremely customizable characters. So you're going to have one set that's going to allow you to build 4 survivors, and these 4 survivors are going to be of a specific armor type, so like rawhide or leather, but you can customize them so that they fit this specific layout that you're maybe building or going for. So this guy has a leather helmet, a catgut bow, and a founding stone. On your character, you can create him so he looks identical to your layout. So it's really cool. There's a whole bunch of customization. We've got these giant racks of just miniatures after miniatures, and very similar to Brimstone, where you're going to buy more of those because you just want to create more to have more stories and more personalized characters. So that's one part of the showdown I really enjoy. The other part that I really enjoy has to be the way that the showdown is ran, because the decks themselves are very straightforward. Each monster is going to have a AI deck and a hit location deck, and they look like this. They're very easy, very straightforward, and they're going to go on this this kind of sidebar. And every turn, the monster is generally going to pull an AI card, and it has a very understandable flow to it all. It'll tell you this is who it targets. This is a flow. This is a time where you can react, and then it'll tell you how it attacks. So it's a very easily readable card, and each monster does things differently. Some of these cards could be statuses. Some of these cards could be, you know, pick a chain and do more things. And there are ways that you can manipulate these cards as well, so you can maybe anticipate what's coming up, or you can control what the enemy's going to do. So there's a lot of cool things, but that deck is also the creature's health. So there's no tracking damage counters or hit points. It's just there. It's the action. And the more damage it takes, the more predictable it becomes, which is really cool. And similarly, you have on top here, you have the hit location deck that's going to be used for, like we talked about earlier, that kind of injecting the story to the attack. So that way, you're not just dealing damage to dealing damage. You hit his heel, you hit his head, you chopped his balls off. You got all sorts of things that could happen. So I love how robust the system is, and it's only 2 decks of cards to come up with this entire amazing system. Any questions about this before I ask you what your favorite thing in Brimstone is?
Oh man, I don't think I have any questions, but that sounds incredible. Because one thing I will say about Brimstone, because it's heavily kind of die-based combat, you don't get as much of that narrative kind of in the combat, and that just sounds really cool. The idea of the hit locations is incredible, and even just looking at the cards that you've posted on this, I'm just like, oh man, there's all sorts of crazy stuff that could happen there. That is great.
And just the way that the monsters interact is so different. With a lion, he's very straightforward, but when you start fighting another human, or when you start fighting a spectral being or a frog that lives in a swamp, the things that you're hitting are going to be much different than other things. There's this creature called the Gorm. That's this baby anglerfish-looking elephant creature, and he has all those features. He has thick hide like an elephant. He's got a bulb on his head like an anglerfish, and whenever you hit him, he could potentially turn and move, and something crazy might happen. And just a lot of cool things to discover and to learn as you play. And I think it's just a lot of fun. So what's your favorite thing, Bryan, about Brimstone? Favorite thing about it that you're like, oh, I can't wait to do this?
I have to say, I think I go back to that kind of core conceit of the game and the world, and the flexibility and expandability that it adds. Just the simple idea of, hey, there's this stuff, it blows up and it creates portals to anywhere you want to go, basically. And Flying Frog has put out so much content, so many expansions. That's a picture of the pile of crap that I have. That's just the stuff that's still in shrink, that I haven't opened yet. And you can see I'm just stockpiling it. In 5 years, I'll pull feral vampires off the board, or off the shelf there, and build a Hexcrawl campaign around that. So just that core conceit of the ability to spread out into all these different thematic areas that don't get touched by other games. There aren't even a lot of games set in feudal Japan, much less games that feature, the lost army of, the guys from the Alamo Last Stand who are resurrected dead, or, even stuff like the feral vampires. It's just, it touches on themes that and locations and such that just don't get a lot of use, particularly in these kind of big campaign games, which is what I tend to love. In terms of Hexcrawl, the kind of indispensable thing about Hexcrawl is the world building, and also like I was saying, the kind of procedurally generated or very kind of loosely generated narrative that you can set up. So I was talking about that picture with all that stuff in the shrink and about feral vampires. So when I get around to playing feral vampires, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it out and I'm going to integrate it straight into Hexcrawl. I'm going to come up with some really basic, I'm not a particularly creative person. I'll come up with some kind of basic, shell of a narrative. Oh, vampires have overtaken Brimstone and they have crypts in 4 randomly generated, you know, mines, and I have to go into those crypts and kill a vampire lord in each one to free the town. Just that 10 seconds that I just came up with on this call adds all sorts of crazy fun adventures and stuff that you can go on. And because the game is building the narrative as you go with the Hexcrawl system, I can't wait to do that. And I'll forget that 5 minutes from now, but I'll come up with something different because it's so easy to do with that system. So
that's excellent.
Yeah.
So the next thing we'll discuss are our potential problems with this. What might be the barrier to entry for some people, or just an issue with the game you have? And mine is very straightforward. It is availability. So the hardest thing with Kingdom Death is to get it. Sometimes it'll be sold out for months. And then all of the expansion content is also really hard to get. It also can be a little bit cost prohibitive. Like, let's go ahead and take a look at the store here. This is the main way you're going to get Kingdom Death, is through the shop. And this is just a set of 4 survivors. And it's about $60. So it comes with 4 survivors and it comes with 4 cards. And it's running about $60. And most models for this game are going to be somewhere along that line. And the reason for the price is because the miniatures are so well done. These are miniatures that you're going to have to assemble. The modeling is crazy. The art is amazing. And the gameplay that it does provide is minimal, but it's pretty dang cool. This one introduces a strain systems, like a brand new mini expansion. You've got lots of choices here. But the biggest thing, I think, is just it's very difficult to get this game. And if you are able to pre-order something, like right now they're taking pre-orders for the newest edition of Kingdom Death, you're not sure when it's going to deliver. So it might be here it might not be here till September or next year. Or honestly, at this point, you're just kind of waiting until they give you an update. And it's kind of one of those back it and forget it things. You cannot obsess about getting this game. I would get the core box and play with what you got, get things as they come out. But the availability is definitely rough on this game. Have you had experiences with this?
Yeah, so a lot of the same caveats apply to Brimstone. It's not an inconsiderable cost. You can get one of the core sets on Mini Market, you probably get it for $80, $90. But it's very much a hobby game. It's kind of the in-between between a board game like Descent and something like Warhammer 40,000. You're getting these hard plastic hips miniatures that you have to cut out of the sprue. You have to glue them together. You know, you have to clean them up a little bit if you don't want them to look like they've got a piece of sprue sticking out their arm. So there's the hobby element, and it really has opened the door to the hobby side of gaming for me, where I have paints that I'm terribly painting my miniatures with, and like all these primers. Ooh, I'm going to prime this one Corax white, you know, so that my undercoat is like, it opens up. It's an investment. The game is an investment. It's an investment in terms of the just sheer money, and it's an investment of time and energy. And it just kind of is one of those lifestyle games. And I know Kingdom Death is the same way. I was laughing when you were talking about, just kind of backing and forget it, because I see videos, I watch videos. It fascinates me. So like people talking about the gambler's chest, and they're like, I don't know, it'll show up in like 2025, whatever. It's got enough content for 5 years, you know. And Brimstone is very similar. You know, I backed the Adventures campaign. I want to say that campaign ran in 2019, and I have no idea. I just filled out the pledge manager for it 2 weeks ago. You know?
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, it's just going to show up when it shows up. But when it shows up, it is going to be a pile of crap, the likes of which you have never seen. Like, you know what I mean? It's not going to fit on my table. And I have a 4x6 game topper table, and I'm not even going to be able to get it on that table.
Oh boy. So seeing as there is this huge amount of content, what would be your advice to people to help them get into this?
Yeah, so I think you want to start with deciding which kind of basic theme interests you more. If you like the Old West theme, then I would honestly suggest starting with the 2 core sets from the Old West, because there's a set called the Swamps of Death, and then there's one called City of the Ancients. And alone, they come with enough stuff to get started, but they don't come with enough stuff to get that kind of procedural generation engine moving. You know what I mean? You have to have a certain amount of cards and tiles and stuff to get that randomization up and running. And so if you like the Old West, those two sets are a tremendous value. I mean, this game, it comes with a soundtrack. Now, it comes with a CD, which is hilarious in 2021. I don't know what the deal is with that, but you can rip it and, you know, whatever. I don't know about the legality of that, but whatever. But it comes with a ton of stuff, hundreds of cards, dozens of miniatures. You get those two core sets and you are off to the races with multiple other worlds that you can explore and such. And that's really where the game kind of sings. If you're more interested in the kind of Japanese, the feudal Japan setting, then just get Forbidden Fortress and really any expansion, because of the nature of the game. Like I said, you can end up on a spaceship and it's not kind of narratively disconnected. It makes sense in world. So you could get just the Forbidden Fortress core set, which is just beautiful. Like the art is incredible in that set. The miniatures were a big step up from the original core sets. Now they've gone and redone those core sets recently, the first two. But Forbidden Fortress is just an awesome game and a theme that doesn't get touched very much. Like Rising Sun is, you know, the one kind of standout I can think of that's in this same realm.
So for me, I think that the biggest thing to do to like kind of overcome that barrier, maybe that apprehension, is honestly just give it a try. There's a lot of guides. VibrantLantern.com is a great resource for Kingdom Death. It'll help you with assembling those initial models. It'll help you with organizing. It'll help you with sleeving. You've got just lots of resources at your fingertips because people want you to play this game. You're going to have a community that is looking to help you out with things because they're all just anxious for people to try out. So once again, I'm going to reference Vibrant Lantern. It comes with all sorts of painting guides and lots of resources for things to look out for, what comes in the boxes, and kind of the order to do things even. It also comes with links to like Amazon so that you can get everything outfitted. And I know for me, that was my biggest apprehension with jumping into a game like this, was assembling the miniatures, because I don't really like doing that. I'm really uncomfortable with things like painting, things like assembling miniatures, because I'm afraid of the permanence, the fact that I could ruin something. And this really was extremely helpful. And using things like the Tamiya glue is super helpful because it actually fuses the plastic very quickly. And I found that very helpful for this whole process. So check out Vibrant Lantern if you're interested in Kingdom Death. And I think it's a great resource.
That's great. Yeah, there's I don't think that there's one central resource for Shadows of Brimstone, but there is another YouTuber that I watch, the guy who does, it's called The Dungeon Dive, I think. And he has like a 35-part series on Brimstone where he starts at the original core box and basically works his way through the contents and talks about the narrative and stuff of every single expansion, and also introduces the Hexcrawl stuff. He doesn't go quite in depth enough with it, but it's what got me started. It's what pushed me over the edge to say, hey, I can do this Hexcrawl. Was watching his videos and realizing that it's not as kind of heavy a lift as I might have thought it would be, because it's intimidating. The Brimstone rule set is already very dense and very complicated, and this is another layer on top of it. But the nice thing about it is that it's modular, so you can just pick what you want to use, basically, you know.
That's excellent. So we're looking to wrap up the stream here in a couple minute or two. Any last questions or final thoughts that you want to share, Bryan, about Brimstone, or any questions about Kingdom Death?
Just when can I come down so we can start our Kingdom Death campaign? Honestly.
Late June, late July. What you doing? We're in the middle of moving right now, so the side game library is moving currently. But probably late June, late July, we should be good to go.
That's great. Yeah, just because it just sounds so awesome. It sounds right up my alley. I'll just have to keep it as far away from my kids as humanly possible, because I know that the theme of it is very adult. So
absolutely, yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Bryan. This has been a great conversation. I loved hearing you gush about Shadows of Brimstone. It's been great to see somebody so passionate about a game, and just really loved having you on.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, this was really fun. You've got a similar vibe going with KDM, you're just not quite as spastic as I am. So you're a little more reserved. I like it.
I'll let the players discover how awesome it is while they're actually playing.
That's great.
So thank you so much, Bryan. Thanks for anybody who tuned in today and anybody who's watching after the fact. If you have any questions about the systems that we talked about today, please leave them down in the comments below. I'm Mackenzie Franklin from SideGame LLC.
And I'm the Grumpy Meeple.
See you later. SideGame strong, everybody. Bye.
Yeah.